Thomas Massie joining us right now, the Kentucky Republican, who is still intent on seeing the Speaker leave, preferably if he would just resign. Congressman, why?
Well, we'd like to see him resign in the manner that John Boehner did, give us a few weeks advance notice. We'll still always have a Republican speaker in that chair, and we can keep going about our business of investigations and hearings while we pick a speaker in our conference instead of letting that play out on the floor. Why do we think he needs to go? Well, he's about to commit his third betrayal today of the American public. The first betrayal was an omnibus bill a few weeks ago that spent more than Nancy Pelosi. His second betrayal was last week, reauthorizing FISA without letting us require warrants for spying on Americans. And he put his thumb on the scale on that. Today, we're going to see the third betrayal. He's going to give up all of our leverage to get any security at the border because he's going to shove Schumer's bill through the House.
But would it be any different if he went? I mean, you only have such a Republican majority, what, 3, 4, 5 seats. That won't change. The reality of that math won't be altered.
Right. We're worried about the 2025. We want to keep the majority. And here's the problem. Mike Johnson is giving Americans no reason to put Republicans back in the majority. He's the uniparty speaker now, and he's not effective at raising money to keep our majority. People know he's a lame duck. He's going to lose his seat sometime this year. But even if he were able to change the rules in order to hang on to power and form some coalition with Democrats, he can't win speakership next year, and frankly, the donors aren't inspired to talk to a speaker who's a lame duck.
But are the donors any more inspired, or voters in general, by an effort that you're leading with 2 others? Maybe there are more out there. Doesn't it look like a Keystone Cop thing, and that's what's making you guys look vulnerable, what you're doing?
Well, I think replacing Speaker McCarthy last fall was sort of a Keystone Cop exercise. He had kept his word. We were working on 12 separate bills. He had done none of the things that Mike Johnson is doing, and he was trying to fight on the border. But what we're trying to do is a more controlled version and basically to pick a better speaker. This speaker has failed the Republican conference.
Well, do you have any names, Congressman, who might fit that bill?
There are at least a dozen people here who could do the job. Our problem with Mike Johnson isn't just what he's doing right now, but he's failed in every negotiation. When you go into a negotiation with Chuck Schumer and you come back with nothing every time, you are either a poor negotiator or you want what Chuck Schumer wants. In either case, Mike Johnson needs to go.
All right, or maybe you recognize the mathematical reality that there's only so much you can demand when you don't really have much backing you, right?
Right. You need to demand something. He's demanded nothing.
All right. So not a fan. Well, I spoke to a New York Republican colleague of yours, Mike Lawler, earlier on this show, and he wasn't a fan of what you're doing, Congressman. This is from Congressman Lawler earlier on. Take a look.
This is the continuation of the clown show. When you look at the challenges facing our country, voters elected a House Republican majority to govern, to serve as a check and balance on the Biden administration. What is happening within our conference is undermining our ability to govern and hold this administration accountable. Speaker Johnson, like Speaker McCarthy before him, is doing the right thing by putting critical legislation on the floor in favor of the American people and in favor of America's role in the world.
So he's saying you're part of a clown show. I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Well, I like Mike Lawler. He's trying to get me kicked off the Rules Committee. I asked him to try harder because I've tried every way to get kicked off the Rules Committee. But one thing about, we need to remind Mike Lawler is he led the effort to get rid of George Santos. And I think that was a bit of a very unwise move. It shrunk our majority, and we saw that seat get replaced by a Democrat. So I don't think he's got the best take on what we need to be doing here in Congress to keep our majority.
But there is a big difference between someone like a George Santos, a serial liar, and Mike Johnson, whatever your difference is, right? I mean, a slight difference.
Well, the thing is, George Santos wasn't convicted of anything. We threw him out, and I would rather have a Republican with a cloud over him than a Democrat in that seat because it's, frankly, the majority relies on it. And Mike Lawler got rid of George Santos. Mike Johnson Mike Johnson did nothing to stop that effort. And I think that's another reason Mike Johnson needs to go.
When you told him to his face this, because to your credit, you didn't do anything secretly behind someone's back. You said, to your face, I think you should go. How did that go?
Well, you know, when I told him to his face, that was in front of our conference in a private meeting, and I'd said the same thing more or less to Mike Johnson 2 weeks earlier. Of course, it didn't go well. He didn't think he should resign. He says he's not going to. But that's what John Boehner said right up until the day he did resign. And I'd like to see Mike Johnson do the honorable thing like John Boehner did and not put us in the lurch. Mike Johnson is the only way that can prevent what happened last fall, where we end up in disarray without a speaker. He's the only one who can prevent that by acknowledging he's a lame duck, acknowledging he did a lot of things that we don't want, acknowledging that he's not the man for the job, and announcing his resignation, giving us his notice so we can start on replacing him in conference.
Let me ask you this. It comes back to this aid package that's being cobbled together, and I know it's still in the process. I understand that. I'm not on the Rules Committee, so I don't understand the process fully. But I do want to ask you about aid outright. To Israel, it seems like you're for it. To Ukraine, you're not, right?
Yeah, and a lot of conservatives are struggling with that aid to Israel in the overall package, because in order to get this bill to the floor, Mike Johnson had to agree to put $9 billion in there for Gaza. And some conservatives here are afraid that some of that will make its way to Hamas. And, you know, that's the nature of this aid. That's a big problem. And when it gets to the Senate, the way they've structured the rules for this, they're not going to be able to separate these things. It's going to be all or nothing. It's going to be money to Ukraine and Gaza if you want to send money to Israel.
Thomas Massie, thank you very much. Let us know how those relations are going and what your next step might or might not be. The Kentucky Republican, who is no fan of the Speaker, wants him to step down.